Morning, Jerry.
Good morning.
I hear that our author actually did call in.
Yes, he did.
So now we won't say nasty things and not say the name of his book.
I wasn't going to say nasty things anyway. So.
I know, me neither. Actually, his book was pretty interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
I was happy to have a local expert in you to refer this book when they reached out to us. And basically, the book is called Family of Secrets, The Bush Dynasty, America's Invisible Government, and the Hidden History of the Last 50 Years. My thoughts said, Jerry Smith should know about this. So Jerry, who wrote his own book, How the West Was Lost, and which we covered on this program a couple years ago when you finished it, and it was called Murder and the American Dream is the subtitle of it. As we were talking earlier, one of the things that struck me about this Family of Secrets book, and also, the body of work that you've been covering for years, is the fact, and this fellow, Russ Baker, refers to it, that most Americans harbor an overwhelming psychic resistance to the deep politics surrounding not only the assassination of JFK, but all the attendant secrets. And because we like to think we know what's going on, and we like to think that we are what we hope to be. But in fact, as this book points out, for all of my lifetime, pretty much, the Bush family, starting with Prescott, the father of senior George Bush, were involved in some pretty nasty goings-on.
Yeah. Well, I guess if I would summarize this book, I would say that this is about the rise of the intelligence community within the body politic of the country. And it's the way that the intelligence community has basically weaseled its way into American politics, into nearly every aspect of American public life. He deals with the Bush family because they go back a long way. And when you read this book, you get a sense that what you are reading about is the elevation of an entire cohort of people, like-minded individuals, whose view of how the country should be run, whose view of policy doesn't necessarily coincide with the views of the elected representatives or the president they ostensibly serve.
Nor are they themselves elected.
No, they aren't.
Nor are they identified even.
Most of the time, that's true, yeah.
Right. So the cohort that you refer to includes people who are both in politics and in business. The energy business seems to have a lot of connects. The whole oil and gas, all of the energy related operations seem to have been touched by this over the last 50 years, as well as media.
Oh yeah, domestic operations, domestic propaganda operations are key to this, because once you realize that a lot of this activity survives because of their ability to keep their actions out of the media, to keep Americans unaware of what they are doing. And there are so many examples of this, and he goes into this at some length, but I'll pick one just to give you an idea. He mentions in his book the confession of Everett Howard Hunt Jr.,
right?
His confession of knowledge of the Kennedy assassination. And Everett Howard Hunt Jr. was involved in domestic propaganda operations as far back as the early 1950s.
Now, just for people, is this the same Howard Hunt that was involved in Watergate?
The same guy.
Right. Okay.
He was involved in the CIA's acquisition of movie rights to George Orwell's two great novels, 1984 and Animal Farm. Mm-hmm. And then he went on to be involved in propaganda operations for the Guatemala coup, the Bay of Pigs invasion, and of course he was a major figure in the Watergate operation.
Right.
And one of the points that Russ Baker makes in his book is that Watergate was not an operation that was run by Richard Nixon. Watergate was an operation run against Richard Nixon.
This was a real eye opener to me of this book, that Watergate, which we kicked Nixon out of office on the basis of, was actually not of his doing. It was basically an act promulgated on him, so that he would go away.
The two major participants in the Watergate escapade were Everett Howard Hunt Jr. and James McCord. Both of these guys were very high up in the CIA. They were G14s at the time, which is like one grade short of...
You can know everything.
You can know everything.
Right.
And everybody who was involved in the Watergate burglary, with one exception, G. Gordon Liddy, everybody else was CIA.
Came out of that cohort.
They came out of the CIA, and they were, all of them, involved in the Bay of Pigs operation.
And the Bay of Pigs, for those of you who weren't born yet, which increasingly our audience is made up of, Bay of Pigs was the operation run just before Kennedy. Well, Kennedy was elected by the time it happened, right?
Right.
But it was initiated in the Eisenhower White House.
Correct.
And basically it was an attempt to overthrow Fidel Castro. It was majorly calculated by the people who ran it, that they thought that the Cuban people would rise up and say, oh, yes, thank you. Something akin to the story that we were told about Iraq recently.
Right.
And, in fact, the people of Cuba were quite happy to have gotten rid of Bautista.
Yeah, the idea that the Cuban people were going to rise up against Castro is key to this, because this notion was floated by the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, Allen Dulles, and they didn't. The CIA didn't really believe this. Now, we discussed this tangentially some time back when I was talking about declassification process.
Right.
And it was clear that the Russians knew that the date of our invasion, and we knew that they knew. And we went ahead with it anyway, because the expectation was that the new president wouldn't risk a political defeat so early in his term, and he would commit armed forces.
All kind of muscle.
Right. So the claim that the Cuban people were going to rise up against Castro was really aimed at
Kennedy. Right.
To make him go along with the whole scheme.
Right.
Now,
when that didn't happen, he was like, sorry, guys, pull the plug on this operation, which evidently led to his murder.
Yeah.
Evidently.
Well, the curious thing here is that
I'm one of those American people who just doesn't want to know. But go ahead.